Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. My name is Raven, and I will be your host today. Today we have Pamela von Sabljar. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Something close enough. You can clarify that if you'd like. She is a speaker, facilitator, and mentor of evolutionary eros. So she's going to be leading us through a special session today. It's going to be 90 minutes, just to keep that in mind for everyone. We're also going to ask that you have your cameras on if you can, so that we can have more intimacy in the room. So with that, thank you all so much for being here. It's going to be an exploration into living with Eros with Pamela. So Pamela, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Raven, and thank you every single one who choose to show up in this room and being a part of this explorative session around living from Eros, the evolutionary Eros. And I would like just to start to invite you all to really land into the space. And before I move on, I'm just going to share that I can notice that I am slightly nervous and excited and curious. And I could notice my imposter syndrome's coming up. So I'm just going to voice it out in the room that I do not see myself as an expert on this topic. I see myself more as an explorer in this room together with all of you, exploring and sharing perspectives, wisdom, inquiry, and practice to dialogue from this space of Eros. So I'm just going to word that so I can get that out of the way. So I actually can get out of the way. So with that, I would like to invite you to truly honor this moment that you're bringing your full life force and your engagement and time into this space. And giving that the reverence that is actually is and have. And if it's possible for everyone who's in this space, I should really appreciate if you put on the video. And by that also bringing your presence to the space, also with your full body. I would also like to invite you to bring your full, authentic, whole self to this space. And I would like to invite us all for just a moment to cultivate your receptivity, your sensing organ, to just allow yourself to just lean back a little bit. Doesn't even have to show on the outside. It's more like an inner or outer movement of just leaning a bit back. To just open yourself. Allowing yourself to slow down. To really breathe yourself into this space. And while you're slowing down, see if you also can allow yourself to soften. To soften into that space within, between, and beyond. And invite your sensuality, aka playfulness. And also fully knowing that your whole humanness is welcome. like whatever you possibly value or judge as good and bad, right and wrong, light and dark. It's welcome. So just allow it to be here, hold it here, allow it to be present and welcome. Just being here. And I also just would like to invite some kind of ground principle for this space here for 1.5 hours. Like it is an invitation for learning and playfulness. And that we are in this exploration together. So with that, I would like to invite you to check in before I move on. Like to check in the chat, like with a word or with a sentence. What pulled you here? What's alive? You can choose between these two questions. What pulled you here into this space? Or what's alive in this moment? So take a moment and check in the chat. Thank you for checking in and thank you for sharing. And I would also like to put out another invitation along the way, and that is I would like you to invite you to hold like 2 gravity points in your consciousness. A gravity point of the intersubjective, the space that is in between us, the spaces that is beyond the sum of us, where we are allowing ourselves to surrender to something that is bigger than the sum of the group. To really practice, to be present to that space, that possibly field in between, no matter if that is a known practice of you or an unknown practice of you. Just allowing to train a possibly new gravity point or keep on practice if it's already known for you under this 90 minutes we have together, to constantly come back to that space in between. And when you noticing that you are more in the personal or interpersonal, then just like, okay, that's what is, and then allow it to practice to come back. And if it doesn't make sense for you, that's all good and all fine. Just play with it, explore it, and then I will invite you to evaluate after the session or in the end of the session, to just hold that curiosity and openness. So before we go further in, I would like to open the space for our inquiry. What are the stories in the room right now around living from eros? What are the stories that's alive in the room around living from eros? What does that evoke in you? So I will open the space for a couple of popcorns, a couple of you who would like to share. And if you choose to unmic and share what the stories you hold around living from eros, and it can be the whole sentence, it can be a word. Yeah, you go where you feel the flow. And be mindful of time. Like when you're going to share, like grab a minute, not too much longer than that. So there is space for a couple of different voices in the room. So I open the space around the digital fire, and anyone who feels to share what stories is alive in the room around living from eros. What are the questions alive in the room, if that pulls more than living from eros?
Hello. I need to clear my voice. I haven't talked to anyone yet today. My name's Colty, and I wanted to actually draw on a story shared by my friend Amanda, who we are in a 7-month-long container that is transformation through burlesque. And so we're doing a lot of group explorations of the erotic and what erotic energy is. And I was very delighted by their story about erotic awareness being a way to come into an alternate dimension that's right there. Like the more one explores one's sensuality and the framework of being open to the erotic, the more one recognizes it's not at such a great distance, despite maybe a cultural narrative about having to earn ways of being. So I'm really delighted. I just have this mental image of them saying it's right there, and wanted to bring their story in. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that into the space for what if it is right there to live from eros. Thank you.
I'll share ever so briefly. I'm in a space right now where everything that matters is pre-verbal. And so the word eros at once brought me here and is somehow, feels like what I've been trying to triangulate my life around with a million different words for years now. And it began with just leaning into trust and just choosing life and waking up every day and choosing life. And it's just continuing down that path. Like no matter how complex the intellectual dimensions can get, it's always just leaning into trust and choosing life and following that feeling just wherever it goes. And my experience of it is that like life just becomes nothing you ever would have predicted when you do that. You can't know where it goes, and that's like so much of the fun of it is you just like you take a step around the next corner and it's like oh my god, like I didn't know life could be this much better than I ever thought it could be. So it's a little bit of my experience.
Yeah, Eros for me comes in as a neighbor, an energetic neighbor of serendipity, as well as there's a balancing and a dancing to it. So when it's moving fast, you can get the speed wobbles, if anyone's familiar, and Culty just put deepening into the chat. There's a sense of something I repeat a lot is this loosening and deepening, and there's like a paradoxical feeling of needing to relax to overcome the speed wobbles so you don't fall over, but it feels like you're going to fall because you're relaxing. And there's a story around that in Eros for me.
Yeah, I think
Thank
that
you. Yeah,
so
go on.
much of what we have in our cultural forms are created from people's ideas and expressions coming together. You know, there's that erotic attraction, and I myself don't have very much of a visual aesthetic, but I have some kind of abstract ideas that they come together perhaps with someone else's more visual aesthetic, you know, and there's that erotic attraction that can produce something, you know, more interesting. And I think that's what we have, you know, we can have much more of that going forward with these creative aesthetic visions, you know, and their erotic attraction.
Thank you so much for the one of you have choose to share. It's beautiful to listen into the collective wisdom around Eros in this group. And there is space for one or two more persons before we move on. And also fully know that if you sit with a totally different story, like maybe you not even are familiar with Eros, maybe it kicks a totally different story than that is already shared in the space, just know that that's equally valid and welcome. So there is room for different perspectives and we explore. Or if there is anyone who came into this space and said, I have these questions, I'm so curious, like please bring your questions, because that will direct the session as well, because we are right now in this moment actually listening into where we want to go, like what is it that it really wants to emerge in this space. So one or two more voices if anyone feels pulled, either to share your experience around living from Eros, the stories you have around it, or just bringing your questions.
So I've been kind of obsessing over Eros over the last, well, feels like my whole life, but kind of like David said, it feels like it's the triangulation of my experience. And finally, the words are coming. But I think for me, some of the questions that I have is kind of distinguishing the difference between desire and love and Eros, and starting to kind of get a sense of the different textures in those words and what they evoke. I've been thinking about Eros and the imagination, or the fantasy realm, or the realm of dreams, and how to bring my dream world more closely to the source of Eros in my life, kind of unify what I love and what I desire in the dream world. And I think Eros is a source of that, or kind of the guiding force of finding that unification. I've been observing the transformation of inviting Eros into my life, and it's been radical. In the sense of being surprised at what was going on before. I'm like, what was happening? What was life before Eros? I'm not sure. I don't know what was going on. And I feel the sense of something emerging that I can't fully grasp or understand, and the necessity to breathe into it, and the bravery, the development of the heart. Yeah, thank you.
So is there one more voice that wants to come forward before I close this circle of inquiry? And it can be the same voice as well, if something is coming up.
I felt very alive when James mentioned the neighbor of serendipity. And it was almost like also this aspect of the serendipity was like the unknown and being in the present moment where it just happens and life happens. And I'm just available for it to come. And I love also the description of evolutionary impulse, where I just feel like sparks. It's like fireworks are alive all the time. And like a deep sense of sensuality and like a like a breath, like when I read Rumi.
Thank you. I said in the start that I do not hold a position as an expert of eros. I do have explored the connection and the practice to eros. I'm heading for 25 years. I have noticed shifts happening through this process, distinctions occurring. And in the start, I didn't even voice it as the evolutionary impulse of eros. I didn't even know what it was. I was just pulled by it. And a bit as you, David, mentioned at the start, I just trusted the subtle impulses that seems to come from a very deep place within, or sometimes also outside of me. It was like coming like this, like in my field. And I didn't even use words as field at that time. I didn't even have an awareness or a surrounding where anyone would use these kind of words. And still, in some way, I could have this deep sense when these impulses came that I had such a deep trust to them. So even if I was shit scared, because I've been a really, really scared human being, and still are, I just choose to trust it and go with it. And amazing and beautiful things unfolded. And as you, James, also voiced the serendipity that came, and things unfolded in a way that I couldn't even figure out myself, and accessing knowledge that I didn't read, accessing knowledge, projects creating like in one whole thing, just landing. And then years later, I could read in books or attend a course and realizing, wow, I did all the right things and I didn't know about this. It's just like I just was really guided. And that is something I share with probably many people in this space in different ways, different forms. That's something a lot of great artists, great innovators, pioneers. And today I make a distinction and I call that a personal relationship to the evolutionary impulse of eros. And I've noticed that the last 10 years that has been intensifying a collective eros wanting to emerge, a group intelligence out of a collective eros. So that is one distinction that I pull in and just want to share with you out of the body of wisdom I have harnessed so far around eros, the evolutionary impulse. To be humble, curious, and open. How do the personal eros, how that can be what I've noticed, and invitation to foster the conditions for a collective eros or intersubjective space. So wherever I go, I can be an invitation for a collective eros between two or more. And I believe that's something that's possible for all of us. It's nothing special or anything with me or anyone else. It's just what I found so far. It seems to be the human condition that wants to be remembered. To be able to cohese into a wholeness as a group of humans, and from there practicing the gravity point of shared awareness, the intersubjective space, and from there allowing the evolutionary impulse coming through in us as a collective group. So we're just becoming a one body. I also noticed, Coletti, I hope I pronounced your name right, you brought in the burlesque and a way of like the sensual energy. You could also say maybe the sexual energy. And in that, I also have noticed that the word eros, to allow that to be reclaimed, that word, or reclaimed back to what if it is maybe, yeah, I just have to be honest and speak my truth for the moment. What if that is one of, it's a very good word for life force, the evolutionary process, life force that fuels the whole universe. And that even if, and a lot of people have the story around that is sexual, and that's not my story of eros. I have noticed that is also there a very specific distinction point, because it is also the sexual energy and not the primal energy, the primal sexual energy, and still they are interlinked. So I also notice allowing yourself to open for that aliveness, that ecstatic, erotic, like energy, is also of threading your stories around the sexual conditions that our society have, in whatever way we choose to do that. So we actually can just stay open and not get threatened when the evolutionary impulse comes in. Because I've noticed that sometimes the space, when we go into this deep contact, interconnectedness and wholeness as a group, and the evolutionary impulse of eros comes, the aliveness, the frequency, like the energy of aliveness comes in. Sometimes it happens that people close off because we have a condition that the sexual energy is shameful and wrong and so on. And then we do not open and trust and go with that impulse of that subtle inner knowing and allow us to be speak when spoken through, or create when we've been creating through, or move when we've been moved through. And I also noticed that to explore and question the story of separation that our society is founded on is also part of investigate and open for that impulse. Because it seems like the radical aliveness or the evolutionary impulse of eros is seeking the deeper contact and the wholeness in us as a group and collective. Yeah, and I also want to say that because that also is a distinction point, a story that sometimes it hangs together with eros, like the ecstatic aliveness. Ecstatic, the root of the word ecstatic actually means to allow the movement to be free. So it doesn't mean that you always are joyful just because you are expressing or sensing and feeling the evolutionary impulse of eros. It can be deep grief, anger, it can be so many different things. It can be words, it can be slow, it can be speedy, so many different full authentic expressions of creation. So before I move on, I wonder if there is anything that is alive in the space that wants to be shared, asked.
There's something alive for me. And it's hard to express. I find it challenging to express this thing we call eros. Because like when you move ecstatically to the beat of the drum, as you mentioned, it's almost like asking which song is being played. And I'm just wondering about the rhythm, the possible rhythms of eros. Does sometimes the aliveness is really there. Really just feel like you're lighter. And other times, does it have aspects of it that are frightening, aggressive? Yeah, it's like the suns can rise and the suns can set. How does eros manifest itself in these possible different shapes and forms? My curiosity.
There was a notion that came up for me earlier. This phrase, the erotics of threat, that feels related to what John just said. Like in the nervous system, threat is a heightened sensation. And it's been my experience and observation that some people equate the two. Like there's this, I want to open up to a heightened sensation, and I'm going to do it through giving myself a sense of threat. And sometimes that's benign. Like, I think that's a funny example to use. Skydiving with, a trained professional is like putting yourself in this heightened state. But there are some people who would rather go cliff jumping, right? And say, I don't want the protection. I want that heightened state. But much more often it's in more subtle versions, like in relationships with people who activate our nervous systems, and the stories that get to flood us because of it. And so I think there is this erotics of that threat or heightened state. And it's a practice of discernment and relationship, as you had said earlier, about, coming into curiosity. Now, how do I know I'm in reciprocal relationship with erotic energy, and not, I'm going to use air quotes here, merely an activated response in my nervous system? And it seems to me that that takes a lot of practice and spaciousness to come into wise discernment of, but also that separating those doesn't necessarily work either. Sometimes it is erotic to be in that charged state. We just don't necessarily use that word to identify it. And I wonder what would be possible if we did. That's all.
I noticed, John, what comes alive when you brought what you brought into the space. What comes alive for me is that acknowledgement of very often when we allow ourselves to live from the evolutionary impulse of eros, no matter what tempo or tact or shape or form it takes, just that moment before you voice it or you act on it, it can feel really scary. Because most of us is not so well practiced to be at the edge of the unknown. To really allow us to go beyond the known concept, the meaning we already are capable of creating. Do you want to come in, Taya, before I move on?
Yeah. Something profoundly happened for me. I'm in a very deep grieving process because my uncle just passed and he was more like my second dad. And I just felt the other day when it happened, I felt actually, I'm realizing now, I felt some ecstasy from the pain. And it's like, can I allow that intensity? Don't want to say pleasurable. It's not about that, but it's almost like in devotion, giving it to the altar in devotion, and it's no different than having joy for, I don't know, birthing a child in a sense. So I just thank you for putting words to that, because I know now what I've experienced.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put logos in the way of eros. It's just, do you really need the word evolutionary? Why not just the impulse of eros? And why do you, if you do need it, why do you need it? What do you mean by it?
Thank you for bringing that question, Ed. The first impulse that comes up out of that question is maybe not. The next thing is, I know the choice comes from the impulse of eros because of there is a story connected to eros in the mainstream that it is sexual and more towards as I would voice it, maybe an old story, an old paradigm of the sexual. So by putting evolutionary, it's my way of pointing to the distinction when it comes to that evolutionary impulse of eros is actually that impulse that comes from the evolutionary process itself. So that's the purpose of me using that word. For me, it's also the evolutionary impulse of eros. Raven, in the start, you voiced like desire. So far, in my exploration, and I'm open that will shift and change, but for now, I experience that desires is the evolutionary process way to communicate with us. So the evolutionary impulse the language of the evolutionary process itself is the language of desires. And then there is a distinction when it comes to desires and the story around desires that probably needs to be playfully investigated and explored, because there are desires that are connected to the story of our society that are more surface and conditioned, that is more connected to our ego self, like our persona, and the conditions of society, what seems to be a part of the hierarchy of success and not success. Like so it's easy for me I desire to have like this beautiful Ferrari or Tesla outside my door. Nothing wrong with Ferrari or Tesla or wanting it, but it can also be a desire for my more surface part of myself, that actually is about me wanting to be acknowledged and loved, and feeling respect in the society I live in. And when you're shredding and investigating and exploring desires, you're finding there are layers and layers and layers and layers. And you're finding on that road, so far, that's what I've explored, that there are desires connecting to a deeper self or a higher self or a collective self, if you would like to say so. And these desires has like a different quality and kicks a different resonance, and they move you. And when you go with them, it seems like it's right there. The reality starts to manifest in a flow, in synchronicity. Yeah. So that is what comes, Ed. I don't know what.
Thank you.
Mm. Yeah, I see. I'm just gonna see her, Kevin. No, Brandon, that was you. I can see.
Pamela,
Mm-hmm.
can I say something about evolutionary?
Mm-hmm.
I think part of what that word invokes is that it's almost as if like the laws of nature can change. Like there's some fundamental things that kind of transcend and emerge, but that rather than living in a static universe or a fixed world, that actually, eros can be spoken about as a force that is creating the change and the changing laws of the universe. So the evolutionary part kind of speaks to a different paradigm of the cosmos as a changing cosmos.
Yes, and it seems that there is a possibility to access the field of creation. And in this moment, I really put myself on the edge of what I have experienced so far. But I choose to go with the impulse, and I can notice it becomes a bit vulnerable, because it's really on the edge. And when you brought that in, Raven, I could notice that if I would use that word, and I will right now, like my energetic heart, it starts to expand, and the energy of agape comes into the space. Because when you voice this, I had one conversation with Ria Beck, the source keeper from Collective Processing, today before lunch, and another conversation yesterday with Raven Cadell, because this exactly what you're pointing at. Cadell asked, not Raven, sorry, Cadell asked, because what you're pointing at right now, Raven, that is actually what's in my experience with this so far. It seems like that's what wants to come forward. There is something really, and it comes alive right here for me in this space. It gets very vulnerable, actually, because I'm like, wow, okay, it's here again. So thank you for being here and allowing that to happen, because that's a co-creation between all of us in this space. And so I feel just really humble right now. So what if there is an evolutionary leap that wants to happen in the collective consciousness of humanity at this time. That we actually can become self-aware of the evolutionary process and show up as conscious creators and co-creators for the evolutionary process. And I do not know what that means, but it seems to be here. And I can notice my persona start to shiver, and I would say it anyway, but it seems to be connected with actually be able to do magic together, and by that shifting reality. And for me, it seems when I look at the meta cris, that could be interesting as a possibility, perhaps. David, you're raising your hand. You want to come in? Mm-hmm.
I'll just speak from what's alive for me right now, and like the term autopoiesis, the self-organizing thing, the some creation that emerges of its own accord. My own experience with developing myself as an individual is that I had no clue where I was going to end up when I started years ago, and didn't have half of the tools or the skills or capacities I did when I started, and I didn't know that I was going to find them and develop them, but it happened, and it happened, and it kept happening, and I'm like so much more like internally sophisticated than I used to be, and I've learned so much more, and I'm just feeling from what you're saying that like that's like maybe what wants to happen on a collective scale. Like we don't know where this needs to go together, but we just got to start in making music and see what happens. Like we just got to like see what music just kind of comes up. Like John was saying something about ecstatic dance, and like what's the rhythm and how do you find the rhythm and whether it's right or not. And like it feels like we find the music together. Like you just start throwing stuff out, and you slowly move towards whatever is most collectively alive until everybody can feel it, and then what's happening is something that you could not have predicted, something that you could not have like cast out forward with logos and found and decided we're going to do that. And I think there is a role for more propositional, strategic, rational thinking to say like let's aim the ship in this direction, but then you have to dance to get there. Does that make sense? I just feel very, very charged right now. I feel like, and I know there's been different energies in the room, so I'll tamp myself down a little bit, because I know there's been some people who've been expressing that where they are now is more like grief. So if I'm a little charged up, I would be happy to bring that back down and hold space for others.
David, are you okay if I invite you for something?
Sure.
What if you're ecstatic or charged can be beside the grief, and none of them takes out the other? The full expression is fully present in the room. So no one has to dim or no one has to rise. We can just be with what is. Again, like the word ecstatic, as I've learned so far, and I can be wrong, the core definition comes from allowing the movement. No matter if the movement is grief, it's a contribution, or if it's charged, it's contribution. Yeah.
Thank you.
And also, what I've learned so far, the core definition of erotic, it's actually creation. So allowing the movement allowing full movement of creation. So I would like to invite us into this things I found along the way of my exploration is 3 practices to be able to open, connect, get out of the way, and being an invitation that fosters the conditions for emergence, both on an individual and a group level. And I would like to invite us, we're already in it, but I just also want to allow us to step into it with even clearer frames, to sensing meaning from eros. That is my intersubjective group practice, how to dialogue, and allowing to speak when spoken through. And before that, I just want to honor, I have had a collaboration with Thomas Steiniger and Elizabeth DeBold, who are lineages holders of emergent dialogue. And I have also had the possibility to have a close collaboration with Ria Beck. And so and that has given me a lot to just have the possibility to bounce off and share wisdom and train and tap into different fields as a way of also enhance and allowing my intersubjective practice around sensing meaning from eros to arise that has been coming forth for the last 25 years. So I just want to word that. So my gratitude and honor to these collaboration partners that has helped me to become even more clear with this practice. So I put in a question in the chat, a question in the center of our space for us to have as a direction point for this dialogue. It is really to show up with curiosity, openness, and to surrender into something that is bigger than us, that is beyond the sum of the group. Allowing a deeper connection and wholeness to arise, and from there speak when spoken through. Very simple, it's right there. And it's really a lifelong practice to practice this different gravity point in our consciousness, a point of shared awareness, and allowing us to be close to the unknown, letting go of the concepts and the mind and the meaning, not in any suppressive or judgmental way, just having it there, but trying to be open that there is something else that wants to speak through. So what is the lived experience in an eros-positive society? This is a question that unfolded when I had the prep conversation with Peter Lindbergh last week in for this session. And he said, yeah, you can use that. A lot of people talk about sex-positive community or society, but how would an eros-positive society or community look like? What is that? And remember the distinction point. So just open yourself to the question. What is the lived experience in an eros-positive society, a life force positive society, an alive positive society, a vibrant positive society? So I open the space for a dialogue, and we will dialogue for around 20 minutes. And anyone who feels pulled to unmute, when you feel a possible impulse to speak when spoken through, and just allow yourself to practice this gravity point of shared awareness. And if you're coming back to the personal, interpersonal, just allow yourself to practice to tap into what's present in between. So what is the lived experience in an eros-positive society? The floor is open and anyone who feels pulled. And remember, spoken when spoken through is a full allowance of the authentic expression of a human being, because all of that is eros, from word to voice, to motions, to body movement.
What's alive for me is this idea of, babies come from a co-creative erotic energy, and when we're trying to create a new world, these cultural patterns that can get us there are co-created through this embodied erotic energy. And probably best that we not think that our babies are our own. We can keep creating, and then to have that wanting to hold and keep your baby as your own can keep it from growing further. So this is a little bit just, that's what's coming alive for me, is this, the possession rather than further creation and further flourishing, this, thinking of your creation as a part of you identify with it, and you want to, rather than allowing it to flourish and be further created by others, and want to hold it close. So that's what's alive for me.
What's alive for me, it's a feeling of gratitude. And it's not only a personal gratitude, but it's an in-between gratitude and a sense of connection of that gratitude with source. As if expression of gratitude should be given to source, in a sense. And that's where eros comes from, as that evolutionary impulse. As if the only way of balancing the give and take could be only by means of gratitude to that force, to that source, to that strength.
It seems that the lived experience in an eros-positive society would prioritize sensual trust. There's so many practices in society about moving away from the senses, or putting pleasure in this ivory tower of sexual engagement where we can long for it, but we can't have it. And it seems that a eros-positive society would offer more spaces to have a visceral experience of safer agreements and more comfortable agreements with our animal bodies and the interactions between our animal bodies. That pleasure could be expanded beyond what's forbidden into something that is accessible and prioritized. Like pleasure would be a priority rather, again, than something you have to earn or play games to get. The games and the play could be around making things more pleasurable, more in harmony and more agreement. It does seem that transcendent states require a dynamic of participation in a whole sensory sort of way. And so when I envision an eros-oriented society, an eros-positive society, it's one that reveres, and like Guillermo said about this gratitude towards source, like you become in a reciprocal relation with this larger force. So you are not required to force yourself or others into transcendent or erotic or heightened states. I would really love to see more safety and safeness encouraged in eros-positive societies, because it seems to be very bound up in how we participate sensually in the world around us.
What comes through is like the joy of alive, to being alive, like to just the pure joy, and how the like that the body being very vibrant and open to really sense these subtle impulses of like, poof, that's where the spark, that was a spark of creation, that was a spark of aliveness, and like people be really being pulled almost like I know there are these apps, you know, when you're close to someone who wants the same thing as you, you get like a ping in your phone. So it's like almost like having this app, like a GPS inside, because you feel that like aliveness, a spark coming up, and you're like going into a room and you're just like, whoa, I'm gonna go there, you know. that's where it is. That's where I should supposed to go. That's where I can contribute. That's where I can serve. That's where that can come forward, that wants to come forward in this moment. That's where I can show up for creation. And yeah, but also like I had that moment, it just comes in Friday when I was on the cinema with my two brother, my how do you say, my brother's daughters, you know, 2, 3-year-old and 5-year-old were at the cinema, and the 3-year-old, she was like starting to dance in the cinema, you know, not disturbing anyone, but just moving because she was so moved, and she just like allowed that. And that's what I see also, like how would it to be an experience of our eros-positive society, just more regenerative, like a regenerative, a deep trust in an abundant mindset, and knowing that life provides. Not always with pleasure, also with pain. It's a part of the human experience. That's what comes alive for me now, in this moment.
I think we would be.
And I just look at Kevin and it's like, yeah, that's how it looks. Sorry. Go on, David. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for your laughter. I think we would be so much kinder to the children, and we would encourage them to express themselves, and we would not stifle them, and we would hold such safe spaces for children to just be spontaneous and dance and be creative and make music and play and sing and explore. And then when we were adults, it wouldn't have been, you know, like squashed down into us, because the like insecurity about doing something is like, you know, as silly as just like breaking out into spontaneous dance because you're just filled with joy for life wouldn't be a problem. So maybe you're walking down the street and you just like feel the spark and you just start skipping and hopping, and like your favorite song comes on in your headphones and you're just like breaking out and dance because you're just alive. That's what I feel. It would be music, it would be dance. Be so much more room for just play and exploration, and it would start young. It holds so much just safe, gracious space for humans to be humans, and you know, counterbalance it with the necessary teachings about discipline, and not like slapping you with a ruler on the wrist discipline, but like, you know, how to eventually choose what you're all about and focus and develop skills discipline but it would never be, well, I don't want to say it would never be. I don't want to draw absolutes that would cut off potential. But music and dance and song, and maybe another modality for group coherence in the near future would be we get together and nobody says a word, somebody just makes a rhythm, and then somebody just sings a note, and then you go from there, and you just literally make music, or you make dance instead of talking.
An eros-positive society would honor death fully and allow it to be a part of the story of our reality with dignity and wisdom. And I can notice that I'm pulled, Kim, and you don't have to, but I just would like to ask what's alive in you. Is there anything that wants to come through? And you don't have to respond, it's just an invitation.
No, I appreciate the invitation, because I'm noticing, I mean, I feel like we do live in an eros-positive society, and all the things y'all are describing are the things I see all the time, but it's the transgressions against those things, that child that moves freely, myself, whenever I have those experiences of utter joy, and then someone decides that that means something that they want to insert themselves into, or hold or take a bite of, because the interpretation of that experience or expression means something to them that is different than the pureness of the expression from myself. And so I'm noticing I was curious at the beginning of the conversation, this idea, because you mentioned sex positive, which is different than eros. Is it, a question I had, is that different than the eros positive society? And then you mentioned the conversation with Peter, and Peter inviting the distinction. And I'm curious about that distinction myself, because I think that's what keeps getting confused, at least in the communities that I'm in, where eros positive and sex positive keep getting confused. And I know that's a complicated conversation. And suddenly, like, while I was talking earlier, thinking before I spoke, I was
suddenly seeing what the bite of the apple really was in the Garden of Delights. It was like that desire to consume that which was being expressed, that in versus like the sacred honoring of the space in between, so that all kinds of stuff could emerge. And the minute that bite is taken, especially without consent, that's what was being expressed, then everything begins to die. And so yeah, that's what has been moving through me.
And I just want to invite for just a moment of silence, just allowing what came through and what is to just become even more present into the space. And coming with an invitation to just go to your discernment of just like, am I still exploring, practicing that possibly new gravity point in my consciousness of the intersubjective, that space of shared awareness? And just allow your sensing organs to braille the field in between us. No matter if that's a true experience of you or you just allowing yourself to play and investigate if something's shown up for you. But really allowing yourself to get even more curious. Is there something more that wants to be spoken in this moment? Is there any impulse that wants to come forward? Is there anything that shines forth? So anyone who feels pulled to speak when spoken through, let's just keep the dialogue going for 1 or 2 more minutes, or 3.
Ooh. My heart is beating really fast. I feel that there's like a collapse. There's a collapse of imagination into this idea that like almost a flat world where there's an equation between sex and the erotic, when I sense that the only place where the erotic is allowed to exist is the sexual, which is a different thing than the erotic being the sexual. But the eros has been drained out of all other facets of being, and the only place where it kind of continues to flicker in our imagination is in sex. And even then, I don't know how much sex is actually deeply connected to the erotic eros. I'm reminded of this, of the evolutionary question, of the question of that word, because it's, in a sense, it's, I mean, this is a completely different paradigm, this idea that the laws of nature change. This is very different than what we've believed before, our cosmology of existence. And it's very, I think it is very scary to face that idea. If you live in a world, kind of in the world of logos, right, that David mentioned, where it's a complete portrait and you can control the future and you can predict what's going to happen. You can make sure that the laws stay the same. And in a world of evolutionary eros, that can't be done. That's not even the right way of approaching existence as such. That's just an impossibility. That's just like a kind of a false reality. That's like a fallen world, right? To live in that way. And maybe that's the story of the apple, right? Like Kim was speaking of, right? There's taking it and trying to control it rather than letting it emerge and be what it is. And letting the rules change, letting the rules of the game change as you're playing them. That being an expectation, that being what you are doing, that being the process itself, is that the rules are changing. And what I sense if you were living in evolutionary eros is that there would be an arousal into virtue, into integrity, that we would have more energy to be coherent with ourselves, with our higher selves, our aspirations, and with the life force that we have inside of us. It's when our life force collapses, we can't become, we're not our higher selves. And I think that while there is a place for dancing and music and all of this in evolutionary eros, there's also a place for work, for vocation, for devoting ourselves to bringing that choice to other people. The meta crisis, these kind of bigger transitions, taking the decay, the compost of the control society that is collapsing around us, and breathing this eros back into it, changing the rules and allowing it to become something new, but in a new way, generated in a new way, so that it doesn't have the same problems as the last civilization that emerged. That's what I feel. Oh, I feel like it's going to be like fucking virtuous. It's like it's a virtue, the ability to kind of step into your coherence and always be at the edge of your own emergence, and inviting others to be in that world with you.
I'm alive, alone, playing in the hills and woods. I am not ill. I do not work. I'm alone, not by choice, but because of choice. And that erotic is in nature everywhere. And being well. I think in that society, in that eros-positive society, there'd be less illness and, well, not to contradict you, Raven, but less work, because what work becomes to people, that salary, that monotony. So there is a kind of difference between the erotic and work, but I take what you say, that, yeah, it can be your work. It's also, eros can be in your work, or your work can be eros. That's just how I feel it. And I've come here by the result of all my choices. And one choice was never to not have that freedom to move.
Thank you. Oh, okay, John, go on, then I will close. Go on.
As what like Raven was saying, maybe and I've noticed it myself, whenever I get this heartbeat, I think that impulse is there. But oftentimes in the past, I shied away from it. there's the thing about openness I'm sensing with all of that we're saying, like unenfolded openness, unenveloping, let's add in the other form of love, of the unagapic, compassionate, enveloping openness in the society. And as people were speaking, I was reminded of when I was trying ecstatic dancing for the past few weeks in a room filled with mostly adults. There's this little girl that was brought there as well. She's like running around in the room. And when you're ecstatically dancing, just moving freely, people could get frenetic and wild. Yet everyone notices that little girl dancing, running in the room, and there's caution. Like when we talk about the lived experience, cautionary compassion, like having a cautionary compassion, and to see the eros in the other, allowing that to create something, peer into a kaleidoscope, see patterns, but as you rotate it, the rhythm will change. And then even going beyond that, allowing the whatever the end of the kaleidoscope to like pop open and onto the world.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you, Ed, for acknowledging nature in the room, because that's in the essence we all are. Just bringing that into our awareness. So with that, I will close the space for our dialogue. Thank you for your openness to practice sensing meaning from eros. I can notice that I'm intrigued. I would love to go on for another 90 minutes. The collective wisdom in this room is just intriguing and engaging. And I just want to say thank you for everything that we all brought into this room, no matter if we brought it by our silence and our presence, or by our presence and words, or by our actions. So no matter how it was brought into the room, we were co-creating and holding the space of the exploration that we've been through around living from eros. And life is unpredictable, uncertain, and unknown. And what if we would really lean into that we are fast adapters, resilient, and designed to skillfully navigate this life experience. And from that point of trust, allowing us to be on the emergent edge of the future. And allowing us, as some words that was voiced in the start, to trust that pull of aliveness, that spark, and go with it. And to show up, radical show up. For what wants to be created or spoken through. In service of something that is bigger than us. The group, the collective, the crisis, the society, the shift. So with that, I would like to invite you to check out. And you can check out in the chat what do you bring forth? Like, what do you bring with from this session? And I will open the space for 1 or 2 voices that would like to share. What did you bring? What do you bring from this experience? And please be mindful of time. So less than a minute if you choose to share. So if anyone feels pulled to share aloud, you can take them, unmute yourself and share.
I feel a smile in the back of my head. I feel energized, but I don't feel manic. So there's a sense of very grounded and deep motivation. Yeah, and a sense of wonder.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to share before we close the space? Okay. So I will end. It's a serious thing just to be alive. On this fresh morning in this broken world. Mary Oliver. Living from the evolutionary impulse of eros. Maybe it is a possibility for a post-tragic point of view, radical hope. That is not about bypassing the pain and the grief that is also part of being alive. Being alive is maybe to hold the intensity of this reality of birth and death and everything in between. So thank you so much for gifting with your presence, your time, your engagement, your wisdom. And thank you for what was creating in this moment. I will bring you forward. I'm honored. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you.